This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. We've got plenty of ground to cover today, folks, but we'll start with this. Gun violence in the US is nothing new, but things are getting worse. More Americans died from gun injuries in 2020 than any other year on record, and one group is being particularly impacted, and that's kids. A new analysis found that guns have been the leading cause of death for children in the US since 2017, surpassing car crash deaths. Kids have been shot and killed while riding their bikes, walking home from school, and even playing video games. The thing is, this is a uniquely American problem. Kids in the US are 15 times more likely to die from guns than kids in 31 other high-income countries combined. Researchers say gun violence has become the #1 cause of death for kids because, while it increased, we've also seen a decrease in car crash fatalities. Let's take a look at how cars are regulated. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration was established in 1970, which had a public database of car deaths to help researchers better understand how road safety can be improved. Things like side airbags, booster seat laws, and automatic braking all helped make kids safer. But there's no federal agency to regulate the safety of guns. Funding was just granted to the CDC in 2019 to begin research on preventing gun injuries, so that data is far less extensive than what we know about car crashes, for example. A study from the American Journal of Preventive Medicine found that 9 million children ages 5 to 17 lived in a neighborhood that experienced at least one fatal shooting a year from 2015 to 2019. That same study found Black kids compared to white kids were at a higher risk of being exposed to gun violence before the pandemic. Since then, the disparity has grown even more. So, where do we go from here? Researchers say that, just like with car safety, prevention efforts can help. In Dayton, Ohio, the local YWCA works on preventing gun violence through 2 programs for middle and high schoolers.
We're hearing from our students just hugely disproportionate levels of stress coming at them from a number of different ways. And I think when you look at gun violence, one of the biggest things is that they feel completely, out of control in terms of you don't know who's carrying a firearm around you. There's kind of that constant threat and that constant potential.
Kids can suffer gun injuries from accidental shootings, getting caught in the crossfire, suicides, and also intimate partner violence.
You see big socioeconomic disparities in our community. So you have families with big financial strains, and you know that all of this kind of comes to a head a lot of times in things like interpersonal violence, in increased levels of suicide among youth in our community. And so being able to, as much as we can, be proactive and give them a safe space to talk, to ask questions.
YWCA Dayton says it has seen quick success with their newest program, Amend Together, which is aimed at engaging men and boys to prevent violence against women and girls by teaching them what healthy relationships look like.
We had an immediate statistical data come back to us that showed from pre-test to post-test that we were changing behaviors among the young men in our community, and that we were able to see that immediate reaction of, oh, this makes sense, it is a clear need, and we are clearly meeting the need.
In addition to gun risks for youth in Dayton, the city also faced a mass shooting in 2019 where 9 people were killed and dozens were injured.
We had staff members who lost family members. We had clients who lost family members. We had our youth programs, right, who were then going into the classroom immediately thereafter with these kids who heard about it, knew about it, had family involved, and having to work through that on top of all of the things that they were already dealing with in the day-to-day. I think it just really put it into perspective how things can change so quickly. But then it also immediately put us into this national conversation of how do we reduce violence in our communities.
A CBS News analysis found that nearly 300 kids ages 16 and under were shot in Chicago last year.
Children are being bored, I feel. I feel that they are getting their hands into different things. Some children come from broken homes, and there's not enough mental health resources out here. The children are losing their friends to death, and nobody is checking in with them to therapy. Nobody's checking into mental health to say, are you okay? Because they're getting numb and they're believing this is normal when it's not.
Groups like Hug a Child, Make a Change are working on prevention efforts across the city.
So we get the children together and we march for peace to let them know that we are fighting for this. We are fighting for them to live and not to die in the city of Chicago.
The organization connects kids with mentors that meet and check in several times a month and offer support and help them reach major life milestones.
My program helps because we're involved in these children's lives. We have graduates coming across the stage this year with honors classes because they have a shoulder to lean on and a foundation of people. So I feel like my program has helped tremendously because we not only work with the children, but we work with the parents, the mothers, the fathers, the sisters, the brothers. We work with them.
These community outreach efforts are so important when it comes to tackling the root of the problem, but some researchers say we also need more data to better understand what is happening with gun violence. Now we're bringing in Dr. Lois Lee, one of the authors of the report released in April of this year, explaining how guns are now the leading cause of death among U.S. children. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for joining us. For starters, can you tell us a little bit about why you and your colleagues pursued this research?
Yeah, so I am an injury prevention researcher, primarily focused on children, but obviously firearms and motor vehicles are important causes of death for adults as well. And for a long time, we knew that motor vehicles always led as the leading cause of death from injury. And I was basically putting together a figure to give a presentation when I noticed that those lines crossed in 2017. And that really just shows that there was a big problem that now firearms, not motor vehicles, were the leading cause of injury death for children and youth from 1 to 24 years of age.
What was one of the most surprising things from your findings, something that may not immediately jump out to people who don't do this kind of research?
I think the really sharp increase since 2014 for firearm deaths. And then if you look carefully between 2019 and 2020, you see that the increase was even steeper.
In the report, you discuss the sort of safety architecture that exists with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, using this as an example and how that agency helped reduce traffic fatalities. I think a pretty obvious question here, why doesn't something like that exist for gun violence? And what would it take to put that sort of safety architecture in place?
Well, as you probably know, firearms are a little bit more politicized than motor vehicles. And I believe that probably has to do a great deal with why we haven't had that kind of infrastructure built. But I don't think that means that it can't be built, right? If you think back to the 1960s or 1970s, I don't think anybody back then would have imagined roads and cars to be so much safer, as they are now. And it just took the political will and the political funding to build that infrastructure, not just for the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, but also for the research databases, both within the CDC and in NHTSA. And I really feel like if we take that approach, and believe that, yes, we have to be in it for the long game, right? It took decades for us to make these differences in motor vehicle crash injuries and deaths, that by using that same framework, which is really well known in injury prevention, that we can do the same for firearm injuries and deaths.
And you mentioned, funding being a big part of, creating that. I keep using the term safety architecture. You said funding is going to be a big part of that. I mean, what else needs to happen to make something like this a possibility?
Well, one, we need better data. We now have at least data on firearm deaths from all 50 United States, but that data has only been comprehensive since 2019. And we don't really have that data at all for injuries. And there are many, many more firearm injuries compared to deaths, not just in children, but also among adults as well. So without really having a true understanding of what are the circumstances, the risk factors, and potentially, protective factors, it's hard to really know what are the best implementation strategies for prevention. And the other thing is just investing in technology to try to make guns safer. There is that technology out there, but it's not sold in the United States.
Dr. Lois Lee is a pediatric emergency medicine physician and the author of Crossing Lines, a change in the leading cause of death among U.S. children. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your interest in our study and in the subject in general. It's important to get the word out.